also with Turkey becoming a member, it meant that NATO had another block, another piece of the puzzle, so to say, to keep the Soviet Union and the Red Army under check, geographically semi-encircling it. So there were different theories at that time in the US. George Kennan, with his containment strategy, became the most influential one, meaning that communism had to be contained. The Soviet Union and the Red Army especially would not be allowed to take over any other states, turning them into communist states. This was also connected with the so-called domino theory, that once another state falls and becomes communist, it entails the risk that another one or another two will fall. So it had to be nipped in the bud, so to say. This was also the thinking behind why in 1955, just 10 years after the end of the war, West Germany was allowed to become a member of NATO. It was quite a controversial decision at the time, as can be imagined. It was also interesting for us today, a situation in which the country, it wasn't the full territory, since East Germany was naturally under control of the Soviet Union. The state wasn't intact. The state was also along a fault line that was very dangerous. But nevertheless, the decision was taken that for our security, it would be better to include them. This is also an argument that the Ukrainians today are holding up, that if it was possible to do with West Germany in 1955, then it should be possible to do with Ukraine either today or in the near future after the conclusion of this war, even if there are still tensions in the area. The alliance in 1955, as I mentioned in a previous episode, it also created a counter-reaction in further east, with the Soviet Union creating the Warsaw Pact together with a number of its Soviet satellite states. So now we had two competing military blocs that were both based on collective defense. It turned out later that when it came to the Soviet Union, they would use this clause. You could say that they had their own domino theory, but here it wasn't external, it was internal. Whenever a state, when there was a risk of liberalization, democratization, and decommunization, the Warsaw Pact could spring into action and quell the uprisings, as we saw in Hungary in 1956, and later on also in Czechoslovakia,
Prague, yes,
with the Prague Spring in 1968. So here is another difference, as many people like to compare so-called NATO expansion, so to say, with Red Army, Soviet Union style expansion. NATO has so far never been forced to jointly invade a member state of its own to put down some anti-NATO sentiment in such a country. So it's worth noticing. 6 years later, after West Germany was included and the Warsaw Pact was created, enough people in the Soviet satellite states, and especially in East Germany, had simply had enough of this communist experiment, and they were, as they couldn't vote in their countries, they were voting with their feet and trying to get to the West, both crossing into Western Germany proper, so to say, or crossing in, which was easier, in the city of Berlin itself, as it was also divided into a western and eastern part, meaning that this wall had to be built, the famous Berlin Wall, and making it clear that this was two competing blocs, two competing ideologies, and there would be no acceptance for people to try to get from one to the other. The alliance continued on. There were some tensions in the 60s, especially in 62, when the leader of France, General de Gaulle, decided that French membership in NATO was a risk to its own independence. He didn't agree to the path that NATO was taking. He decided to pull France out of the unified command structure, making France still a member, but on a much lower level. And this is something that continued up until 2009, when President Sarkozy brought France back.
Adam, I'm going to have to ask you to pause there. As usual, we've run out of time, but we'll pick it up next time. There we are. I've interrupted Adam almost in mid-sentence, but fear not, if you join us next time, as we hope you will, we'll pick up the story. In the meantime, thank you very much and look forward to seeing you next time on Poland Daily History.